This is Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. I hope you enjoyed this Critical Thought, your daily discussion on game design. Alright, we got a good post for you today. First, my hair is still sticking up. I'm going to be getting a haircut this week, so hopefully by the end of this week you won't be seeing it won't be like popping about on my headset too much. But we got a great critical thought for you today. We're going to be talking about the difficulties of balancing story and gameplay when it comes to the pacing or general structure of a game. This was sort of based on the previous critical thought when we talked about adapting video games to other mediums. And this is actually going to be the basis for a post on Game Wisdom probably in the coming days. As we've talked about, video games are unique when it comes to their storytelling by the fact that you have player interaction. And because of that, it leads, or has always led to the struggle between the story that the designer is trying to tell versus the mechanics that they're trying to get into the player or trying to make the player do. And for a lot of games, they tend to get around this in interesting ways. With retro games, the story was never really the focus. The princess is always in the castle. Save Pauline from Donkey Kong. Even stuff like the Final Fantasy series, while the story is a major component of it, it's not really directly affecting the gameplay. On the other side, things we have games that are fully about the narrative or the story, with less game mechanics or less arbitrary systems to do things around. Stuff like Her Story, Gone Home, Analog A Hate Story, and a lot more. But as we've been seeing, especially in the AAA space and in some cases in the indie market, developers have been trying to merge these two separate elements more and more. Games like Uncharted, The Last of Us, and today's example of Tomb Raider are really big cases where the developers are trying to tell a very emotional, very thought-provoking story, but at the same time they're trying to balance the mechanics and the gameplay around it. And this is where we run into this kind of an issue. Like I just said with Tomb Raider over here, this is from Rise of the Tomb Raider, Lara Croft, when you take a second to stop and think about it, she is a horrible character. I mean, just very poorly written and poorly defined. And I'm not sure what the critical reception was for Tomb Raider and Rise of the Tomb Raider, but playing both of these games, this is a very big example of the clash between story and mechanics. Now, I'm going to spoil things slightly here, so if you haven't played either game, you've been warned. With both Tomb Raider games, they've rebooted Lara Croft to sort of being like, this is like year one Lara Croft. She hasn't become the badass archaeologist of the previous games. And the first game was essentially her trial by fire on an island, dealing with fanatics, getting beaten, stabbed, punctured, impaled, burned, attacked by wolves, and we can go on by it. And in that game, the other side of things was the gameplay of this kind of open world exploration with linear events, fighting enemies, getting away from explosions, stuff like that. And the problem, though, again, is that they're trying to present Lara Croft as, someone who's way out of her element. She's scared, she's frightened. In Rise of the Tomb Raider, there's elements of PTSD from her previous experience and tragedies from her family. The problem, though, is whenever we actually start playing the game, all that stuff just becomes completely out of it, in a sense. In both games, you have like Lara Croft, she's crying, she's emotional, she's not trusting people during the cutscenes, and then when you're playing the game, any NPC who's asking for her help, she's gonna give it. She's not only she's completely in control, but she's basically a serial killer in Tomb Raider. Like, this is one of those games, like, there's like in the first one, there's a scene where she's, crying, she's broken down, she's asking, I can't do this, how am I going to do this? And then you start playing, and she will jump off a ledge, hit a guy in the back, grab her climbing tool and slice and slit his throat open with it. I mean, she uses that the climbing tool basically more than like Jason does in Friday the 13th in most cases. And this contradiction of story and mechanics really comes to a head in one scene that just is so absurd and really just brings, I think, the whole thing down in a sense. About halfway through the original Tomb Raider, there's a part where Lara Croft survives a massive attack, massive accident, and she has, I think, like a arrow or some kind of metal object impaled in her leg. And, she's in pain. The music is somber. There's people surrounding her outside, and you're thinking, how is she going to get out of this one? So we spent about 20-30 seconds of her pulling the object out of her leg, lighting her torch head, or I'm sorry, her arrowhead on fire, and then canonizing the wound, basically sealing it shut by burning it. So again, we're looking at this as it's a very emotional scene. She's injured. We're not sure what's going to happen next. And then what we see next is she stands up, perfectly fine. She starts taunting the guys and invents explosive arrows and then proceeds to kill about 20 or 30 guys who just pop out of the woodwork in this shanty town. I mean, what just happened there? And it's this kind of clash that it causes two problems. The first is it creates a sense of narrative dissonance. Because you can't tell me that my character is emotionally suffering and fragile, and then you have them wandering around killing guys indiscriminately and in incredibly badass ways. This is the same issue we have with Uncharted with Nathan Drake, who is basically an archaeologist combined with Rambo, Schwarzenegger, and any other action star you can think of. And there's been jokes, I know, Penny Arcade strips making fun of the fact that he's supposed to be this archaeologist, but he's pretty much killing entire armies as he's going around. The second problem is when you're trying to establish the mood or the tone of your game mechanics, this can create almost like a Jekyll and Hyde or multiple personality of your game. And Tomb Raider is one of those titles. I love the open world elements, trying to survive, hunt for resources, exploring the tombs and stuff like that. But then the second we get into the combat sections, the game just takes a nosedive for me in each case. The problem is that combat really isn't developed all that well. Your weapons are very basic. There's just not a lot in terms of viable tactics. And most often the best thing to do is hang back and wait for headshots. If you're going to focus on mechanics and the combat side, then they need to be fleshed out. The Arkham Asylum games, or the Arkham City, whatever, I'm not sure what we actually call like the official series of that. Let's just say Batman from Rocksteady did a really good job of balancing your tools with the situations at hand. Batman, of course, is a badass, but he can't, run into a group of 10 guys and beat them with his fists if they all have guns. Instead, what they did, which was very clever, was take the fact that Batman is essentially a predator and build that into the stealth system. So we have the in-game story of Batman basically, again, being the master of the situation and applying that to the mechanics, either by making him, again, a expert in hand-to-hand combat, and using the environment and his tools to, again, take these groups of armed thugs down one at a time. In Tomb Raider, again, it feels like I'm playing two different games. And one of them is the one that I want to be experiencing, and that's the open world exploration. And this kind of challenge is always very tricky to do, and we've seen other games suffer as well. Far Cry, starting with, 3 and on, has also had this issue of presenting the story of you building yourself up, you're taking on overwhelming odds, and then once you start getting those upgrades, you essentially become death incarnate. You can just enter a highly defended military stronghold, and with all your upgraded guns and skills, just take them all out as a one-man army. And again, this has always been the challenge, or it's becoming more and more of a challenge as developers are trying to integrate their storytelling into their games more. And there's been a few cases where things have worked. The Metal Gear Solid series, for instance, has always presented Solid Snake as, again, a literal one-man army, the greatest living soldier of our time, but they don't present him, again, as being, bulletproof and unbeatable. It's, again, about a combination of tactics and intelligence that win the day, rather than just running into an army with one gun and killing everyone. And when it comes to, again, balancing your story and your action, it is very tricky to do that, especially if you're trying to aim for it. And it's one of those elements that it's better, I think, if you're going to do it, you have to do it right than doing it poorly. For me personally, I'm one of those guys who I rather have a great gameplay and poor story rather than poor gameplay and a great story. But that is definitely more of a personal opinion. But to wrap up today's critical thought, and I guess to summarize things, as we're trying to see the video game medium evolve, developers have been trying to push the story more into, or integrate the story more into the game mechanics. And you have to be really careful because, again, at the end of the day, video games are meant to be played, and the gameplay has to be experienced. And if the story becomes too much of a hold on the gameplay, you run into situations when the two will just not sync up right. And this can lead to your game appearing two-faced or multiple personality, and can also really sour things. It's better to have, as we've talked about before with the concept of harmonizing game design, a game that everything feels in sync, a well-oiled machine, will always stand out better and be looked upon more favorably, compared to a game that just feels like things are stitched together for multiple groups or elements. And this is where the idea of a really good experience comes into play. Portal and Portal 2 are not long games in the grand scheme of things, but they're just very well executed. The story serves things, even though the gameplay kind of stands aside from the story, it still feels like it's fully integrated. And again, we could probably have a critical thought on Portal, just talking about that game as it is. And I'm sure there is more to talk about when it comes to this kind of discussion of pacing versus mechanics. And as always, if you have any suggestions for critical thoughts or topics to expand on, make sure to leave them below. For the big question for you guys today is, can you think of any other examples when the story essentially clashes with the mechanics? Now, we can think of easy examples, such as we talked about with titles like Diablo 3, where everything hinges on the player, no one else can do anything, the chosen one trope, stuff like that. But to make things interesting, I want to ask you guys about games where the narrative clashes with the mechanics. Again, having games where the player is supposed, or the character is supposed to be written as one way, but the mechanics and the gameplay present them as another. Whether you're supposed to be a somber, quiet individual, but then you play the game as a homicidal madman, or if you're supposed to be crazy, but the mechanics never let you do anything like that. As just a really brief tangent, a surprisingly good example of mechanics and story working together would come from a very unusual source. Hotline Miami 2 is a game that is all about ultra-violent, gruesome deaths, destruction, and a very awesome soundtrack. But there's one character in the game where the story and the mechanics actually synced really well, and that was with the journalist character. For those of you who didn't play the game, one of the characters you play as in Hotline Miami 2 was a journalist investigating all the events, and he basically comes off as a pacifist. He will not kill unless he is absolutely pushed to do it. And so when you play with him, when you start playing any of his levels, you are not allowed to use any firearms whatsoever because he doesn't want to kill anyone. And when he uses any melee weapons, he will just, knock the guy down and just leave him there. But what happens, and what's a possible option, is you can force him to beat up an enemy and kill them. And if you do that enough times, he'll basically snap and he rips his sleeves off his shirt, and then he will go around and kill people. But this is a really good example, again, of how the story and what they're trying to tell with this character meshes with the gameplay. Again, this is a character who doesn't want to kill anyone, but if he gets pushed, he will basically make that snap. And that's a really good counterexample, again, to Lara Croft, who is, in every cutscene, she's unsure of herself. She's doubting herself. She's not sure she can do this. She's scared. And then she picks up a assault rifle and starts shooting people in the head or creating Molotov cocktails and lighting people on fire. But let's wrap things up here. Again, thank you so much for watching. And if you're enjoying these critical thoughts, be sure to like and subscribe. Be sure to check back daily here and on GameWisdom.com, where we examine the art and science of games for more great content. Once again, I'm Josh Bycer. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow. Catch you all then. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoy it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and of course share with your friends. It always helps out. For daily posts on all manner of game design and industry topics, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the site and everything that I do, be sure to check out the Patreon campaign. If we can hit goals, it will mean more content for everyone to enjoy, and I'll be able to support myself and my household. If you want to follow me, you can find me on Twitter at GWBycer for updates throughout the day and random thoughts from me. And lastly, you can find me on Twitch right over there at GWBycer for daily streams most nights around 10 Eastern. Thanks again for watching the video, and be sure to check out more great content coming to the Game Wisdom channel real soon.